Hi everyone, my name is Gemma and welcome to this craft session today where I will be showing you how to get started with your crochet. So what we're going to be making today is a small sample crochet square like this one, where you will be learning how to crochet in rows using the double crochet stitch. And what you will need for this is a crochet hook. I'm going to be using a size 6, which is quite a big size hook, but that's just so that you can see what I'm doing a little bit better on the video. If you don't have something this size, you've got something smaller like a size 4 or 5, that's also fine. It just means that your work will be slightly smaller than the sample that I've just showed you. The other thing you'll need, of course, is some yarn. With my size 6 hook, I'm going to be using this chunky yarn, which is quite thick, as you can see. If you're using something smaller, like a size 4, then some double knit or DK yarn is ideal for that size hook. It's a little bit thinner, as you can see. The other things you will need for today are a pair of scissors, and if you have it, a stitch marker, which looks like this. If you don't have a stitch marker, please don't worry about it. I talk a little bit more about it in the tutorial, but it can be helpful. Okay, so once you've got your materials together, let's make a start. Okay, so to get started with your crochet, the first thing you need to do is get your yarn onto the hook. And to do that, you make something called a slip knot, which is basically an adjustable knot that you slip over the hook once that's done. The way I do it is to leave a tail of about 10 or 15 centimetres at the end of your piece of yarn. Then wrap the yarn around your finger like this into a little circle. And then if you grab it at the top like that, and then let this tail end just drop down behind so it kind of goes across the circle. Then if you bring your hook in, and you're going to slip your hook through that circle under that piece of yarn there, like so, and then you just grab the tail and the working end, which is attached to the ball of wool, and pull, and there you've got your adjustable slip knot, so you can move that up and down like that. And what you don't want to do at this point is to pull it really tight against the hook. You need a little bit of a gap, probably about like that, and that's perfect. If you struggle with the slip knot, you can just tie a little knot, leaving the tail again, but as before, don't tie it really tight to the hook. Leave a little gap like that so that you've got room to get your hook through. So the next stage from this is to make what's known as your starting chain or your foundation chain. And when you work rows of crochet, that means that this determines how many stitches you will have in your piece of work. So it's a little bit like casting on with knitting. And the way you do that is to make chains. And the idea with a chain is to yarn around the hook, what's known as yarning around the hook. So you bring your working yarn, the bit that's attached to the ball of wool, around the hook from back to front. And then if you grab this little knot here with your finger, and then the idea is that you use the hook to pull that other loop through the one that's already on your hook. Okay, and that there is your first chain. It looks like a little sort of V shape. And then to carry on your chain, you do the same thing again. So you yarn around your hook from back to front, like this. It's a little bit fiddly because you sort of have to use both hands at the same time and you don't have much to hold on to on this side. But if you grab hold of that little bit there and then use your hook to pull the yarn through, like this. The other thing to mention at this point is once you've done this, try not to pull your chains too tight like this, because what you're going to do once you've made these chains is to put your hook back through the middle of them like this, and if you pull them too tight, that is a real struggle. So try your best to not make your chains too tight. Sometimes for beginners the size of the chains are a little bit all over the place because of, depending on how tightly or loosely you hold your hook, which is known as your tension. Quite often your chains are all different shapes and sizes. It's nothing to worry about, but try not to pull them too tight. It's better to have them too loose than too tight. So I'll just show you again. So you yarn around the hook and then pull through. If you pull and twist at the same time, you should be able to bring that through. So I've now got 3 chains there. And you just keep going like that for however many chains you need for your piece of work. With a crochet pattern, it will normally tell you how many chains to make as your starting chain. Okay, and the way that you count your chains, if you've once you've made a few, you will see that on this side, if you put it, there are sort of 2 sides to the chain. This side you can see those little kind of V shapes or plaits. It looks like a little plait. Okay, but if you turn it over, it looks quite different. You've got like this little row of bumps along the back. Now to count your chains, what you really want to be looking at is the side with the V's and the plaits, so that you can count. And what you do is you don't count this little knot at the beginning, and you don't count the loop on your hook. So everything else in between you count. And the easiest way to do that, I find, is to, if you look at that little V shape, there's a top and a bottom. There's a top strand and a bottom strand. If you just count the top strands, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I've made 7 chains there. So what I'm going to do is carry on and make 10, and then I'll come back to you and we'll carry on. Okay, so I've now made my 10 chains. If you are using a smaller hook than me, you may want to make a few more, because your chain will look a lot smaller with 10 stitches than mine does, because I'm using chunkier wool. So if you want to make a few more than 10, that's fine. And so what we're going to do next, you've got your 10 chains, which means you've got 10 stitches. But when you start to make the double crochet stitch, which is the shortest crochet stitch you can make in terms of the height of it, you have to put an extra chain on the end. So we're going to do one more chain and make that 11. Okay, and so to make your first double crochet stitch, you need to put your hook, as I said before, into these chains to work back along this chain to put in your first row of stitches. Now this is can be really fiddly to start with, especially for a beginner. It's what I call the caterpillar stage, because even by the time you've put this first row in, it looks like you haven't really got very much going on. And it can look a bit like a caterpillar or a slug, and you can get a little bit disheartened, but don't get disheartened. You have to go through this stage. It's the hardest bit, but once you've got this first row in, things do sort of improve and start to look a bit better. So what you're going to do is you're going to put your hook into the second chain from the hook. So that means it's not the loop on your hook, it's not this one, this next one here, because that's where your wool is coming out of. It's the next one. And the easiest way to do it is, again, to locate that top strand of the V and just put your hook straight through from front to back under that loop. Okay, and then you're going to grab that yarn behind with your hook and pull it back through your chain so that you have 2 loops on your hook. Okay, and then the final stage of the stitch is you yarn around the hook again like you did with the chains from back to front, and then you pull that through both of those loops. Okay, and that is your first double crochet stitch. Now you can't really see it very well because it's the first one, but if I put it towards the camera, you'll see that V shape there again, which shows up as your first stitch. So we'll do the next one. So you move along to the next chain, so not the one where your work is coming out of, the next one, which is that one there. You put the hook through from front to back under that top strand, grab the yarn and pull back through, so you have 2 loops on your hook. Then you yarn around the hook again and pull through the 2 loops on your hook. And once again, if I move the hook, there you go, you'll see you've now got 2 little V shapes there. And so what you want to do is you want to carry on into each of those chains until you get to the end. That one's the last one, and you should at the end have 10 of these little V-shaped stitches. Okay, I'll show you one more time and then I'll carry on and meet you back here. So you go from front to back with the hook under the next chain, grab the yarn and pull it through, 2 loops on the hook. Then yarn around the hook again and pull through both loops on the hook. So there, I've got 3 double crochet stitches in there. Okay, so I'm going to carry on and finish off, and I will meet you back here when I'm done. Okay, so I've now put my 10 double crochet stitches into that chain, and as you can see, as I said before, it doesn't look very much at the moment. It looks a little bit like a caterpillar, but what you've got, if you turn it towards you, you can see you've got that little row of these again, and you should have 10 of them there. So we'll count them, so you can count them a bit more clearly now that that first row is in. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I mentioned earlier about stitch marker. I find it's a good idea to mark that very first stitch that you made there. If you can, you just slide that in underneath. If you haven't got a stitch marker, you can use a safety pin or a paper clip, and that just shows you where your first stitch is, because what you're going to do is then work back along here, back to that first stitch, and sometimes the first stitch of the row can be quite difficult to identify. Okay, so when you get to the end of your first row, you have to do what's called a turning chain, which it just lifts your hook back up, ready to go back in the other direction. And because the double crochet stitch is a short stitch, the turning chain in a row of double crochet is 1 chain. So you get to the end of your row and then you just make 1 chain, which again is yarn around your hook and pull through. And then when you work in rows, you actually have to turn your work, turn it over, because you're going to be working back along these stitches here. And once you've put that first row in, from now on, your stitch is both of these strands of these little V's running along the top. So where you're going to go with your hook next, whereas the first row you only had the chain to put your hook into, now you've got these nice 2 V's. So you're going to put your hook underneath both of those strands there to make the next stitches, and you do this now with every other row. This now becomes your stitch, the double strand. So you've done your 1 chain turning chain, and then if you turn it towards you, you're not going to go back into this one here because that's where your loop is coming from. You're going to go into the one at the bottom. You're going to put your hook from front to back through under both of those strands. Again, grab the hook, grab the yarn and pull it through so you have 2 loops on the hook. Yarn around again and pull through 2. And then that's the first stitch of your next row. Then again, I'll show you again, you go to your next stitch, which is this one here. You've got those nice 2 V's there. you go under both of them, grab your yarn and pull through, yarn around the hook and pull through 2. And so then you carry on doing that under every stitch until you get to the marked one, which is the last stitch of your second row. I'll do it one more time for you and then let you do yours and meet back up here when we've got to that point. So under both strands, grab the yarn, so you have 2 loops on your hook, yarn around the hook and pull through 2 loops. Okay, so I'll carry on with mine and I'll meet you back here. Okay, so now I've got to the end of the second row, and what I've done is I've moved my stitch marker back to the other end to mark the first stitch again, just so that you know where that is when you come back in the other direction. These end stitches, it's quite easy to miss them, and if you do miss them, it means you're dropping a stitch with every row and your crochet will start to look more like a triangle or a sort of parallelogram rather than a square. So to keep your edges straight, you do need to make sure that you remember to catch those end stitches, which is why a stitch mark or something in there is a good idea. So now that we're back to the other end again, you do your 1 chain, turning chain, yarn around the hook and pull through 1, and then remember, turn your work. And again, you've got your nice row of these there. You're going to go under the first 2 there, grab the yarn, pull through, 2 loops on the hook, yarn around again and pull through 2. One more time, go under both strands, remember, pull the yarn through with your hook, 2 loops on the hook, yarn around and pull through 2. And that really is what you carry on doing to make a square or a rectangle of double crochet stitches. You just keep going into those stitches. When you get to the end, remember to do your 1 turning chain and then turn the work and move back in the other direction. Mark your end stitches with a stitch marker or a paper clip if it helps you keep the number of stitches. It's also quite a good idea to count your stitches at the end of every row to make sure that you haven't dropped any. And again, to do that, if you turn the work towards you and you see these little V's, you just count the V's. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like so. And then really you just keep going. And the only other thing I didn't mention, which I should have done at the beginning, is different people hold their hooks in different ways. I hold mine like a knife, like this. Some people prefer to hold it like this, which makes it easier to pull the yarn through. It just depends on what your preference is. They are the 2 ways that the books tell you to hold the hook, the knife hold and the pencil hold, but usually I say to people, as long as you can do the stitch, it really doesn't matter how you hold the hook. So yeah, you just carry on like that, making your double crochet stitches, and before long you'll have quite a nice piece of actual fabric that you've made. It's quite a short stitch, so it's quite, the fabric is quite close. There aren't any gaps in it, so you can't really see through it. It's a nice little stitch. Okay, so keep doing your rows, keep practicing, and good luck with your crochet. So when you've made your sample to the size that you want it, either a square or a rectangle, and you want to cast off, you get to the end of a row, you go through your last stitch, as I showed you before, you finish the stitch, then you make your 1 chain as before, and instead of carrying on, you just grab your scissors, leave a tail of about 10 or 15 centimetres again, and just cut like so. And then all you're going to do, seems a bit scary, is just pull that through there like that, and then tighten the knot, and you're finished. I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial, and thanks very much for joining this Surrey Library's craft session. Good luck with your crochet, and I hope to see you again soon.